Welcome. I'm Andrew, a psychoanalyst, a Lacanian analyst here in Edinburgh, Scotland. This is the first of a series of talks I'm going to be doing on medication. Psychotropic medication. Medication used to treat mental psychic suffering. Let's start with some comments on psychoanalysis' relationship to medication. A first observation: the presence of this medication in the contemporary landscape, its prevalence. You will, I'm sure, have encountered statistics on the extent of the prescription and use of these medications. It's by no means uncommon for a prospective patient or analysand who comes to see an analyst for the first time to tell you they're taking medication, maybe more than one, or that they've been on medication in the past. And yet, medication is typically ignored by psychoanalysis. Very little attention is paid to it. It's not often discussed, and it's not often written about. And when it is discussed, it's often in negative terms. It's positioned within the domain of psychiatry, as a concern of psychiatry. And psychoanalysts are often, and often rightly, critical of contemporary psychiatry. And as part of this, they have questions about medication's place within it. The process of prescription, rates of prescription, dosages, the exclusion, the shutting out, the marginalisation of other forms of treatment. Along with this, medication is often positioned as a problem, an issue for analytic work. We will come to ask why. Let me be clear at this early point. I'm not here to give a series of talks that are simply critical of medication, that position it as a bad thing. That's not what interests me. Medication isn't something Freud or Lacan discuss much at all. We have Freud's what have come to be called cocaine papers that predate his psychoanalytic work, and I'll be returning to these. But beyond that, there's very little. For Lacan, references to medication are also very limited. We have some brief comments in his contribution to the Conference on Psychoanalysis and the Formation of the Psychiatrist from November 1967. But apart from, I was looking at Seminar 8, the seminar on transference recently, and there's a fleeting passing reference in a discussion of ancient medicine to diets and doses, and what might be taken as a veiled reference to medication, among other things, problematizing the idea of health. Apart from this, is there a single reference in the seminars or a creed to medication? Let me know if there is and I've overlooked it. So, what does Lacan say in his 1967 address? This is my translation. Now, as you know, psychiatry, I heard it on television. Psychiatry enters into general medicine on the basis of general medicine itself entering entirely into the dynamics of the pharmaceutical. Obviously, new things are happening here. We obnubile, we temper, we interfere or modify. But we do not know at all what we modify, nor where these modifications will go, nor even the meaning that they have, since it is about meaning. Obnubile doesn't necessarily translate that straightforwardly into English. It can mean obsess over, but also obscure. For both Freud and Lacan, it was a different landscape pharmacologically. There wasn't the rates of prescription or the range of medications that there is now. But medications were around then. Indeed, in relation to Lacan's work, we have the revolution, as it's called, in psychotropic medications of the 1950s. 1953 sees chloropromazene, that had initially been developed as a surgical anaesthetic, first used as an antipsychotic, the first antipsychotic it's been called. And it's from chloropromazene that so many of the psychotropic medications that follow, including the SSRIs, would derive. 1958 sees the first modern antidepressants being prescribed, iproniazid and imipramine. Psychotropic medications, the deliberate use of substances to treat psychic suffering, have been around for a very long time though. They're there in the ancient world, in Greece, where it's clear there was extensive use of a whole range of medications, a pharmacopoeia. To take just a handful of examples, opium was used to treat anxiety and sometimes what we'd now call depression, as well as other conditions. Opium was used extensively in ancient Greece. Scilla, hypericum, frankincense, strychnos were directed towards the treatment of different forms of depression. I'm being somewhat schematic, I'm providing just an overview here. As we'll see, the use of individual medications was more complex than this. Mandrake, henbane and hellebore were used as what we might call antipsychotics to treat people suffering from delusions and hallucinations and psychotic forms of excitation. Lithium salts were used to treat mania. They were used by Galenus in Rome and were maybe used in Greece as well, although this is less clear. And these substances could be administered in combination with one another, and they were often mixed with wine and consumed that way. And we find the use of medications in the Greek myths among the gods and mortals. It's interesting the way in which this is something that struck me quite a while ago. The names Xanax, paroxetine, diazepam, bupropion, promethazine, Luvox, Serax, how redolent they are of the names of Greek deities. We could slip them into a mythology, and nowadays, who would notice? It's perhaps not surprising given the history of the use of Greek etymologies in naming medications, but it's only with the emergence of Hippocrates and his school in the 5th century BC that the idea that it was the gods who were able to cause and the ones who could ease mental suffering really comes to begin, let me stress begin, it just doesn't just go away, to be challenged. Prior to, and indeed well after this is the level things were located at. It was the gods, and only the gods, who could cause and ease mental suffering. Lacan will at various points in his work locate the gods as belonging to the order of the real. In Seminar 11, after discussing the ancients' conception of dreams as containing messages from the gods, and wondering whether the gods still might speak to us through dreams, he'll affirm their presence at this level. The gods belong to the field of the real. And we can say the same about medication. With medication, we're treating the real with the real, or trying to treat the real with the real, which is quite different from how we typically conceive of what takes place in analytic work. Indeed, Artemidorus, in his interpretation of dreams, that incomparable guide to the unconscious of the ancient Greeks, will designate the gods as the first prescribers of medication, writing of the divine prescriptions that occur in dreams, in which the gods do prescribe cures for people, adding, there are those who say that the art of medicine actually originated from such prescriptions. And as he will go on to state in regard to these divine prescriptions, you will find that they are completely consistent with medical practice and do not stray outside the science of medicine. We have then these tiny, mute, anonymous objects, pills, tablets, materially quite banal in terms of their size, appearance, identity, difference. They don't even typically look that different from one another. These objects that are redolent, I think, of a triumph of materialism, perhaps, I'm asking the question, more than science. Why do I say this? Because our understanding of them is so limited. We are far in our understanding and use of them from the strictly reliable statement that Lacan in Seminar 15 conceives of science producing. We could, in some ways, apply this to medication more generally. Even with a medication as typical, as quotidian as paracetamol, at one level we know it can work, but we don't entirely know how paracetamol works. With psychotropic medications, it may well be the case that yes, we possess some understanding of how they work at the level of their neurochemical effects. SSRIs serve primarily to inhibit the reuptake of serotonin, and yet in terms of understanding the impact of these effects on a subject's psyche, this remains highly limited, as is evident at one level in the uncertainty or unpredictability and variability of their effects upon individual subjects. It's absolutely the case that, as with SSRIs and associated medications, SNRIs plus, a medication might help one person and won't another. It might well make them feel much, much worse. And why? The reasons aren't clear. It's not something that's understood. There are no definite answers. I'm not saying anything controversial here. This is broadly acknowledged. Anyone who's experienced treatment for mental health issues in the context of, say, a national health provider, certainly here in the UK, will be aware of what this means in practice. Someone presenting for the first time with a mental health condition, with, let's say, depression or depression and anxiety. In the UK, there will typically be an initial consultation with a GP of maybe around 10 minutes. An SSRI, and it is likely to be an SSRI if the person is presenting for the first time, might then be prescribed. Here in Scotland, the guidelines indicate sertraline as the first medication to be tried, based on the logic that if it's going to work, it's perhaps going to be the quickest to work, at around 10 days. There's nothing, though, to indicate this medication will work with the individual patient. There's nothing to guide the GP prescriber in this respect. If this first medication doesn't work, another medication, another SSRI or SNRI or related medication might be tried. But it's a hit and miss process. This is openly acknowledged. There's nothing to guide the prescriber in terms of which subsequent medication might work, including nothing in terms of how the patient reacted to the first medication, say sertraline. A series of medications can and might well be tried until one might be found that works, and what works means can vary a great deal. It's not just the case that the patient's broader medical history provides little or no guidance here, but more significantly, neither does the subject's history, as we call it, and all that this encompasses. But you can't glean much of this in 10 minutes, of course. Are we in the realm then of chance or science? Science or chance? We're made aware here of Voltaire's trident barb against doctors. Doctors put drugs of which they know little into bodies of which they know less for diseases of which they know nothing at all. The emphasis here is clearly upon not knowing. Modernity is still taking shape. Well, actually, by the later portions of Voltaire's long life, we're somewhat beyond its earliest stages, and into the emergence, the formation of modern psychiatry. We're still, though, at the point where there's less belief in science than we have now, that's clear. There's a real that science, or science and chance, hasn't shrunk by so much. Even now, though, with psychopharmacology, we are still so often in the realm of the unknown, of the persistence of the real actually in the face of science. All of which raises the question of progress. I'm not sure it's so prevalent now, but there was a moment when patients were often told that you need to take an SSRI because they had a chemical imbalance. You have a chemical imbalance in your brain. This is highly similar to the humoral conception coming from Hippocrates and his school of too much black bile. You suffer from melancholia, I'll be returning to this term, because you have an excess of black bile, and we need to purge it with hellebore. With the chemical imbalance account, there's no attempt to ask why, or to attempt to make sense of this. I'm not going to go on at too much length about this. It's been raised enough times before, and you're probably familiar with the arguments. But since J.J. Schildkraut's 1965 paper, the catecholamine hypothesis of affective disorders, that's widely regarded as heralding the arrival of the chemical imbalance thesis, it's been, as we all know, very broadly taken up. It's gained wide acceptance among a high proportion of publics, 85 to 90% in the West, continues to be propounded and broadcast by doctors, and continues to cast its shadow over the medico-psychiatric treatment of mental illness, dominated as it's become by biological psychiatry. This is despite the body of research, reaching back to at least the 1990s, calling into question the legitimacy of the thesis and demonstrating that there's no clear evidence that serotonin levels, or a lack of serotonin activity, or of monoamines more broadly, are responsible for depression. Psychoanalysts have been particularly irked by this, and rightly so, this simple material explanation in which the subject's history and the question, yes, but why? Why don't I have enough serotonin? Are so typically foreclosed. So, looking back on what I've just been saying, it's probably true. With contemporary psychopharmacology, we're so often on the side of materialism rather than a mature, developed science. I'm aware I've been focusing on the SSRIs and their cousins here, but we know the extent of their use, and we find the questions they raised echoed at different levels in regard to so many other psychotropics as well. In regard to this, it's worth reflecting on the way in which the treatment of mental health, in its medical institutional context, has seemed to lag behind other sectors of medicine in the progress they have made. With almost every other sector, over time, over the centuries, since say the 5th century BC, we can point to the ways in which clear and definite progress has been made. We're often right to be critical of many notions of so-called progress, which can often be myopic. Some things are gained, but others are lost. But with medicine, things are perhaps, maybe not always, but in many cases, clearer. Indeed, we could say that medicine presents something of a beacon of progress, perhaps. And yet, with mental illness, with psychiatry, can we really say the same thing? Has it not lagged far behind these other sectors? This might be disputed, but as we know, many would contend that the psychiatric treatment of mental illness has in many ways become worse over the last 3 to 4 decades, let's say. So, you can read a paper like Monoaminergic Neurotransmission, the history of the discovery of antidepressants from the 1950s until today. It's by Lopez Munoz and Alamo. It's from 2009 and it appeared in the journal Current Pharmacological Design. You read a piece like this, it's interesting, it's a detailed paper. You can learn a lot about the real and about suffering. And then, in the midst of this, you get various potshots being made at psychoanalysis and its fall from a position of dominance within, in this case, US psychiatry. These potshots deploy an absurd pre-logical drivel to explain why biological psychiatry and the notion of a chemical imbalance have proved psychoanalysis was wrong. The peach of which is probably, at this time, 1952 is being discussed, at this time the prevailing doctrine on the etiology of depression was that it was the result of psychodynamic processes, despite the fact that the therapeutic effects of electroconvulsive therapy were obvious. I know, it's staggering. What is going on here? Regardless of what you think of ECT, what is this supposed to mean? The authors are a vice-rector of research and a professor. With this level of reasoning, this ex juvantibus fallacy, or fantasy, be tolerated in any other field of medicine? At one level, dare I say, it could be quite entertaining to read this kind of thing. How seriously are you supposed to take it? But I don't want to be churlish. Couldn't we say that this type of argument, and this paper is hardly alone in making it, has been a tenet of the discourse of biological psychiatry? But it was all the more shocking to me because it's found in what, as I say, otherwise seems a diligent, commendable paper. Couldn't we say that this argument then is indicative, is symptomatic of why psychiatry has lagged behind other areas of medicine in terms of the progress that's been made? I want to put that question out there. And yet, as I indicated, in many ways this is an interesting paper, and it does provide some comments on the notion of chemical imbalance that aren't as ridiculous as those I've just alluded to. We have to revise, consider and revise our positions continually. As the paper argues, the concept of chemical imbalance can and has possessed the capacity to relieve patients of the heavy moral burden associated in some parts of the world with mental health conditions. I say some parts, you could argue that still, in many parts of the world, despite what we might like to think about being able to be open and transparent about mental health, questions of judgment are still certainly at play. We haven't gone as far as we might like to think in terms of being able to be honest about these things. As the paper argues then, the broad dispersal of the chemical imbalance thesis has had the capacity to revolutionise the view held by the most traditional sectors of societies about mental illness, entrenched as it has at times been in quasi-medieval conceptions such as states of possession, attitudes which have been held even by psychiatrists themselves, some of whom had continued to see patients as deranged individuals with moral defects, needful of moral therapy. You can imagine the form this might take. The chemical imbalance argument can present a significant counterweight or rejoinder to this, offering a perspective that is, in comparison, quite benign. Psychoanalysts, as arch-pragmatists, should be receptive to this. There's another link between the gods and medication. The power of them. The fact that these tiny, mute, anonymous objects can put you to sleep. They can kill you, you can overdose. They can make you feel better. They can save you. They can stop the ravages of anxiety. They can lift you out of depression. They can calm your body enough for you to exist, to live in the world. They can make you suicidal. They have a power akin to the gods. Hesiod, the early cataloguer of the gods, will speak of Paean, P-A-E-A-N, the physician of the gods, describing him as Paean who knows the remedies of all things, invoking a knowledge that doesn't and hasn't ever existed, the fantasy of an absolute subject supposed to know, who can and will heal. This is another we'd perhaps like to believe exists. Lacan in Seminar 15 will refer to the subject supposed to know as the one who must always be there to make us comfortable. But of course, this is a figure that hasn't ever existed. Instead, we put our faith, or belief is perhaps the right term, in the other of science. An other that is, despite our hopes or claims or fantasies about what's possible now or will be in the future, an other that is barred, lacking. As part of this, we put our hopes, our faith, in these little pills. To do what exactly? With what effects? With what outcome? What, to return to Lacan's comments from his 67 address, does this all mean? This is what we're going to be exploring. I'll be taking up this question in the next of these talks, Pharmacopoeia Part 1 Pharmacon. If you liked this video, click on like and subscribe to the channel.